The morning I realized my daughter was about to marry the wrong man started, like every other weekday. At 34, I was juggling two jobs, raising my 23-year-old daughter, Emma, and trying to convince myself that life had finally settled down after years of struggle. Emma was my whole world. I'd had her young and for most of her life. It felt like we were growing up together. So when she called me one evening and said, "Mom, Ryan proposed," I cried right there in my kitchen. At first, they seemed perfect together. Ryan was handsome, successful, polite, and knew exactly what to say. The kind of man who brought flowers when he visited and called me ma'am with a respectful smile. But there was one problem. I'd never actually spent much time around him. Emma lived across town, and between my jobs, our schedules rarely matched. Most of what I knew about Ryan came from Emma's excited stories. "He treats me like a queen. Mom, he's amazing. You're going to love him." And I wanted to believe her. I really did. A few months before the wedding, I started driving for a rideshare company during the early mornings to earn extra money. Weddings weren't cheap, and Emma insisted she didn't need help. But I wanted to contribute. One rainy Tuesday at 6:15 a.m., I accepted a pickup request from a downtown apartment building. I pulled up to the curb. Then a man stepped into the back seat. I glanced at him in the mirror and nearly dropped my coffee. It was Ryan, my future son-in-law, my daughter's fiancé. For a second, panic rushed through me. But then I realized something. He had absolutely no idea who I was. Emma and I looked surprisingly different. She had inherited her father's blonde hair and blue eyes. I had dark hair, darker skin, and looked younger than most people expected. Ryan had only seen a few photos of me, and according to Emma, he wasn't exactly the type who paid attention to family albums, so he slid into the back seat without even blinking. "Morning," he said while staring at his phone. "Morning." That was it. No recognition. No awkwardness. Nothing. I drove him 20 minutes to a corporate office downtown. Before getting out, he gave me a polite smile. "Thanks." And then he disappeared into the building. I remember laughing to myself afterward. What were the odds? But the next morning I got another request. Same apartment, same destination, same passenger, Ryan. Again, after the third day I realized this wasn't a coincidence. It was his routine. Every morning at almost exactly the same time he requested a ride to work. And somehow the app kept matching him with me. For weeks I became part of his daily life. The strange thing was that he slowly started talking. At first it was harmless. Comments about traffic, weather complaints, work stress, then longer conversations. He talked about coworkers, friends, money, his future. Meanwhile, I sat behind the wheel listening carefully, never mentioning Emma, never revealing who I was. The more he spoke, the more uncomfortable I became. Something about him felt different from the man my daughter described. His charm seemed rehearsed. His kindness felt calculated. And every morning, I noticed another tiny crack in the perfect image Emma had built around him. I couldn't explain it yet. I couldn't prove anything. But deep inside, a mother's instincts were screaming. Something wasn't right, and I had no idea that within days, I was going to hear a conversation that would completely destroy everything my daughter believed about the man she planned to marry. For the next 2 weeks, I kept driving Ryan to work every morning. And the more time I spent around him, the more uneasy I felt. It wasn't one specific thing. It was dozens of little things. The way he talked about people. The way he laughed when someone else's problems benefited him. The way he always seemed to calculate what he could gain from every situation. One morning, he spent 15 minutes complaining about a friend who had lost his job. Not because he felt bad for him. Because he was annoyed the friend could no longer afford expensive dinners. Another morning he bragged about convincing a coworker to take responsibility for a mistake he had made. He told the story like it was funny, like it was something to admire. I remember gripping the steering wheel tighter while listening. Every day my instincts grew louder, but instincts weren't evidence. And Emma was deeply in love. If I accused Ryan of being a bad person without proof, she'd think I was trying to sabotage her happiness. So I stayed quiet. I listened, and I waited. Then came the morning that changed everything. It was a Thursday, cold, gray, and unusually quiet. Ryan got into the car looking irritated. He didn't greet me, didn't make small talk, just sat in the back seat scrolling through his phone. A few minutes into the drive, it rang. He answered immediately. Yeah, man. His tone relaxed. I assumed it was a friend. At first, I wasn't paying much attention. Then I heard Emma's name. Every nerve in my body went alert. I kept my eyes on the road and listened carefully. Ryan laughed. No, she has no clue. A pause. Then another laugh. My stomach tightened. No, seriously. It's easier than I thought. The friend said something I couldn't hear. Ryan shook his head. Trust me. Once we're married, everything changes. My hands suddenly felt cold. The traffic light ahead turned red. I stopped the car. Ryan continued talking, completely unaware of who was sitting in the driver's seat. Look, her savings account is bigger than I expected. My heart nearly stopped. Savings account? What savings account? Emma had spent years building her savings. She worked overtime, skipped vacations, lived modestly. Every dollar represented sacrifice. The light turned green. I drove forward. Ryan lowered his voice slightly, but not enough. And then there's the house. House. My house. The house I had recently placed into a trust that Emma would eventually inherit. Only a handful of people even knew about it, including Emma. And apparently Ryan, his friend, must have asked another question. Because Ryan smirked, a smile I'll never forget. Come on, you think I'd be doing all this if there wasn't a payoff? The words hit me like a punch. I felt physically sick. For a moment, I wondered if I was misunderstanding. Maybe there was context I didn't know. Maybe. Then he kept talking and destroyed every benefit of the doubt I had left. Do I care about her? Sure. Another laugh. But love? That's a stretch. I couldn't breathe. My daughter was planning a wedding, picking flowers, trying on dresses, dreaming about a future with this man, and he was discussing her like an investment opportunity. Then came the sentence that made my blood run cold. The best part is she trusts me completely. I nearly missed a turn. My chest felt tight. My hands were shaking. But I forced myself to stay calm, because if I reacted, he would stop talking, and I needed to hear everything. Ryan continued. We'll be married before she figures anything out. His friend must have made some joke because Ryan burst out laughing. Exactly. Another pause. By then it won't matter. I felt anger building inside me. Not ordinary anger. The kind that comes when someone threatens your child. The kind that settles deep in your bones. For years I had worked double shifts, missed sleep, sacrificed everything, all to give Emma a stable future. And now this man was planning to use her, exploit her, possibly destroy everything she'd worked for. The rest of the ride felt endless. When we finally reached his office building, Ryan ended the call and grabbed his briefcase. As usual, he smiled politely. The same fake smile, the same mask. Thanks, have a good day. For the first time I looked directly into his eyes. Really looked. And I saw something that terrified me. Not guilt, not remorse, confidence. He believed he had already won. He stepped out of the car and walked toward the building without looking back. The moment he disappeared through the revolving doors, I pulled into a nearby parking lot. Then I broke down. Not because I was scared, because I knew exactly how much this was going to hurt Emma. The man she trusted most had just revealed his true face, and I was the only person who knew it. But as I sat there staring through my windshield, another realization hit me. Ryan had made one critical mistake. He thought I was a stranger. He had no idea that the woman driving him to work every morning was Emma's mother. And for the first time since hearing that conversation, I felt something besides anger. I felt determination. Because if Ryan thought he was about to marry my daughter for her money, he was about to learn a very expensive lesson. I didn't tell Emma what I had heard. Not right away. That decision haunted me for days. Every time she called to talk about wedding plans, every time she excitedly showed me pictures of venues or decorations, I felt sick to my stomach. Part of me wanted to blurt everything out, to tell her the truth immediately, to protect her before she got hurt. But another part of me knew exactly what would happen. She was in love. Deeply in love. And people in love don't always listen to warnings, especially when those warnings come without proof. If I told Emma that I overheard Ryan saying horrible things during a rideshare trip, she'd probably think there had been a misunderstanding. Or worse, she'd think I never liked him and was trying to break them apart. No. I needed evidence. Real evidence. Something undeniable. Something Ryan couldn't talk his way out of. So the next morning I picked him up again, and the morning after that, And the one after that. I became patient, very patient. Ryan still had no idea who I was. In fact, he seemed more comfortable around me every day. Sometimes he'd vent about work. Sometimes he'd complain about Emma's friends. Sometimes he'd brag. And when people think you're a stranger they'll never see again, they reveal parts of themselves they normally keep hidden. One Monday morning, he slid into the back seat looking irritated. Bad day? I asked casually. He sighed. You ever know someone who's too nice for their own good? I glanced at him in the mirror. What do you mean? My fiancé. The word made my skin crawl. He laughed. She's smart, but she's way too trusting. I kept my expression neutral. That sounds like a good quality. Depends on who's around to take advantage of it. Then he smirked, like he'd told a private joke. My stomach twisted. A normal person wouldn't say something like that. But Ryan wasn't normal. Ryan thought he was clever. The more he talked, the more confident he became. And confidence makes careless people dangerous. A week later, that carelessness gave me exactly what I needed. It happened on a Friday. Ryan got into the car while texting furiously. A few minutes into the ride, his phone rang. This time he put the call on speaker. I don't think he even realized he had done it. The voice on the other end belonged to the same friend I'd heard before. The conversation started normally. Then it took a turn. So did she sign the paperwork yet? The friend asked. Ryan grinned. Almost. What about the prenup? Ryan actually laughed. There's not going to be one. My pulse quickened. The friend sounded surprised. Seriously? Seriously? How'd you pull that off? Ryan leaned back comfortably. Easy. I told her prenups are what people do when they expect a marriage to fail. The friend whistled. She bought that. Completely. I felt anger rising again. Emma wasn't naive. She was kind. There was a difference, and Ryan was exploiting it. Then came the part that made everything crystal clear. What happens after the wedding? His friend asked. Ryan answered without hesitation. First, joint accounts. I gripped the wheel. Then I start moving things around. The friend laughed. And if she notices? Ryan shrugged. She won't. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He wasn't just thinking about taking advantage of her. He was planning it. Step by step. Like a business strategy. Like a project. By the time the ride ended, my hands were shaking again. But this time I had something valuable. Information. Details. A pattern. That evening, I started doing my own research. And what I found made things even worse. A friend of mine worked in property management. Another worked in corporate recruiting. Neither knew why I was asking questions. I simply asked if they'd ever heard of Ryan. Within days, pieces of the puzzle started coming together. The image Emma knew and the real Ryan were two completely different people. The successful businessman he claimed to be? Exaggerated. The promotions he bragged about? Mostly fiction. The financial stability he constantly talked about? Far less impressive than he'd led everyone to believe. Then I learned something that stopped me cold. Ryan had been engaged before. Not once. Twice. Both engagements had ended suddenly. And according to someone who knew one of the women, money had been a major factor in the breakup. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Ryan targeted generous women, built trust, created dependency, then positioned himself to benefit financially. Maybe he wasn't technically a criminal, but he was a predator. A different kind of predator. The kind that hides behind charm and good manners. The kind people defend because they seem so nice. And my daughter was his next target. I spent several sleepless nights deciding what to do. Finally, I came up with a plan. Not an emotional plan. Not a reckless plan. A smart one. The first step was surprisingly simple. I sat down with Emma for lunch. Halfway through the meal, I casually asked, "Have you two talked about a prenup?" Her expression immediately changed. Exactly as I expected. "Mom." "What?" She sighed. "Ryan doesn't believe in them." I nodded. "Why?" "He says people who truly trust each other shouldn't need one." There it was. The exact line he'd used. Word for word. I felt my heart sink. He'd rehearsed this. Carefully. Deliberately. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I just want you protected." Emma smiled. "I know." Then she added something that terrified me. "Ryan always says you're a lot like me." I nearly froze. A lot like me. The irony was unbelievable. Ryan had spent months talking to me, confiding in me, revealing himself to me, and he still had absolutely no idea who I was. But that was about to change. Because by then I wasn't just gathering information anymore. I was building a trap. A trap designed specifically for a man who believed he was smarter than everyone else. And soon Ryan was going to walk straight into it, completely unaware that the rideshare driver he'd ignored for months was about to destroy the perfect image he'd worked so hard to create. By the time I finished building my plan, the wedding was less than 3 weeks away. Ryan thought everything was falling perfectly into place. Emma was finalizing decorations. Guests were booking flights. Venues were being paid. And Ryan was walking around with the confidence of a man who believed victory was already guaranteed. What he didn't know was that the ground beneath him was about to disappear. The first person I finally told was Emma. Not because I wanted to, because I had enough evidence. I invited her over one Sunday afternoon. Just the two of us. No distractions, no interruptions. The moment she sat down, she could tell something was wrong. "Mom, what's going on?" I took a deep breath. Then I told her everything. At first, she stared at me in complete disbelief. Then came denial. "That doesn't sound like Ryan." Then anger. "Are you sure you're not misunderstanding?" Then tears. Painful tears. The kind that come when your heart is fighting against the truth. I expected all of it, so instead of arguing, I showed her what I had collected. Notes, dates, details, information about his previous engagements, his lies about work, his financial deception, the conversations I'd documented. Everything. For nearly 2 hours, Emma sat silently reading. The room felt unbearably heavy. Then she reached one page. A page containing the exact comments he'd made about her savings account. I watched her face change. The denial finally cracked. And for the first time she whispered, "Oh my God." Then she started crying. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quietly. Like someone mourning a future they thought they were going to have. As a mother, it was one of the hardest things I've ever witnessed. I wanted to take away her pain. But I couldn't. All I could do was sit beside her. Eventually, she looked up. Why would he do this? I didn't have a good answer. Because some people don't love others. They use them. And that's exactly what Ryan had been doing. The next thing Emma said surprised me. She wiped her tears and asked, "What do we do now?" Not what should I do. What do we do? And that's when our plan truly began. We decided not to confront Ryan immediately. Instead, we gave him exactly what he expected. A happy fiancé. A wedding moving forward. A future that appeared untouched. Meanwhile, we quietly made changes. Every financial account Emma owned was secured. Access permissions were reviewed. Legal documents were updated. Inheritance arrangements were protected. And most importantly, a prenup was suddenly introduced. Ryan's reaction was immediate. Emma later showed me the text messages. At first he acted hurt, then disappointed, then offended, finally angry. The mask was slipping. Best, he spent days trying to talk her out of it, trying to guilt her, manipulate her, convince her that love should be enough. But Emma held firm, and every time she refused, he became more frustrated. The man who claimed money didn't matter seemed unusually obsessed with discussing it. That alone told us everything we needed to know. Then came the wedding rehearsal dinner, the moment we'd been waiting for. Friends and family filled the venue. Everyone was smiling, laughing, celebrating. Ryan looked confident again. He probably thought the prenup issue would eventually disappear. He had no idea what was coming. Halfway through the evening, Emma stood up and tapped her glass. The room fell silent. She smiled. "I want to thank everyone for being here." Guests applauded. Ryan smiled proudly beside her. Then Emma continued. "But before this wedding happens, there's something I need to address." Ryan's smile faded slightly. The room grew quiet. Emma looked directly at him. "I recently learned that the person I've been planning to marry isn't who I thought he was." You could feel the tension instantly. Ryan laughed nervously. "Emma, what are you doing?" She ignored him. Then she began listing his lies, one by one. Calmly, clearly, precisely. The room became completely silent. People stared. Family members exchanged confused looks. Ryan's face turned pale. At first he denied everything. Then he blamed misunderstandings. Then he accused others. The predictable progression of a cornered liar. Finally, Emma revealed the last piece. The piece he'd never see coming. She pointed toward me, sitting near the front. My mother knows the truth better than anyone. Ryan glanced at me, confused, then puzzled, then suddenly frozen. I watched the realization hit him. The rideshare driver, the woman he'd spoken to every morning, the stranger he'd trusted, the person who heard everything. His eyes widened. For several seconds he couldn't speak. It was almost surreal. Months of confidence evaporated in an instant. "You," he whispered. I simply nodded. The room erupted with questions. People wanted answers, explanations, details. Ryan looked trapped, because for the first time he was. The carefully constructed image he'd spent years building was collapsing in front of everyone who mattered, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Then came the final mistake. Instead of apologizing, instead of taking responsibility, he exploded. He started yelling, blaming Emma, blaming me, blaming everyone except himself. And in doing so, he revealed more of his true character than we ever could have. The room watched, horrified. The performance was over. The real Ryan had finally stepped onto the stage. Within minutes, the engagement was over. Guests began leaving. Family members surrounded Emma, and Ryan walked out alone. No bride, no wedding, no future, no access to anything he'd spent months trying to reach. Just consequences. The following months weren't easy for Emma. Healing never happens overnight. There were tears, questions, moments of heartbreak. But there was also something else. Freedom. The freedom that comes from escaping a mistake before it becomes a disaster. A year later, Emma was happier than I'd seen her in a long time. Stronger too, wiser, more confident, and surrounded by people who genuinely loved her. As for Ryan, the last thing I heard was that he had moved to another city. Apparently, rebuilding trust becomes difficult when enough people learn who you really are. I don't think about him much anymore. But sometimes, when I remember those early morning rides, I still find it unbelievable. For months, he sat in the back seat of my car, talking, bragging, planning, confessing, all while believing I was just another stranger. He never bothered to notice who was behind the wheel. And that was his biggest mistake, because the woman he ignored wasn't a stranger. She was the mother of the woman he intended to betray. And when it mattered most, that mother was listening. In the end, Ryan lost exactly what he thought he'd won, and my daughter kept something far more valuable than money. She kept her future.